slices of everything. So, but that is a dream one day. But again, thanks for the chance to be here. What we're going to talk about is some of the concerns and issues related to construction of data centers. So we've got a really good panel here that's going to give a multitude of perspectives, whether it's from the supply chain side, whether it's from the power side, whether it's from the developer side, whether it's from the local government side, is to walk through some of those issues. So instead of me introducing everybody, I'll go down the line here and let everybody introduce themselves so they can give you their perspective or kind of the way that they're coming at this. So.
My name is Jason Browning. I am the National Strategic Accounts Construction Manager for North America for Schneider Electric. To build all the software and monitoring and aspects of the data centers.
Hi, good morning. I'm Whitney Czelusniak, and I'm the Economic and Business Development Manager for Appalachian Power. In my role, I help to attract new business opportunities, including both industrial and commercial load, to our Virginia and Tennessee service territory. It's a pleasure to be here. I will preface by saying today that I'm an economic developer by training. I've been working here in Virginia for a little over 15 years. So sometimes if you may have a very technical question today, I may be putting that a little bit to some follow-up, but my responsibility is boots on the ground helping to present our territory. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
I'm Tim Mitchell. I'm Director of Water Resources for the City of Lynchburg. I've been with the city for the last 26 years, professional engineer. So my perspective is going to be from a local water use standpoint. So I'll be interested in having the discussion about water use.
Good morning. I'm Matt Conrad. I work for a company called Tract Capital Management, and within Tract there are several divisions, but the first of which is called Tract, and it's basically a large-scale land developer. We do all of the horizontal development to prepare sites for hyperscalers or for development ourselves through our other company, Fleet, which actually will construct and build the data centers. We're in about 15 states so far and have 30,000 acres entitled and under some state of development between Arizona and Virginia. I'm a lawyer by training, but at Tract I do external affairs, mostly focused on state and local government and policy. But most importantly, I'm a Lynchburg native, born just down the street at Lynchburg Baptist just a couple years ago. And I see a lot of friends in the house, so glad to be with you.
Thank you, Matt. Vince Barnett, you've heard from me a couple of times. I am the industry leader for data centers for the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. We, VEDP, we are the state's lead economic development organization. I think I mentioned this earlier, 25 years. I've done a little bit of everything for VEDP. I've sit on the executive management team. I've run our marketing team. I've run our international business development program and a number of other things. And about 2 years ago, with the volume of data center activities that we continue to see and some of the complexities, each project is more and more complex as they grow and all the things that we've talked about today, our CEO and I decided we needed to put a senior member of the executive team focused on data centers, and that is my role currently. So delighted that you all are here today and looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thanks. We truly have a Class A panel here. I'm going to start with a question that is not on the script, but I think will actually be easy for each person to answer because I think each of them is going to give a different perspective. And that is, from your perspective, what makes a good site and what makes a bad site or project? Vince, we'll start with you.
Oh man, it seems simple that it's very loaded. So a great site in its most simplistic terms,
and give it from your perspective.
Yeah, from my perspective, in the most simplistic terms, it has the infrastructure that is needed, and it resides in a community that is embracing, welcoming, and thoughtful on their approach for whatever the industry is, whether it's data center or other. So if I have that, utilities in a willing community that understands what they're getting into, that is right at the top of my list.
Vince stole my thunder, but I'll maybe just go a little further. So when I joined Tract 6-8 months ago, I think our land development team was very much focused on at least 3 GIS layers. Once you find that assemblage or parcel, we specifically are focused on parcels or assemblages north of 350 acres. 1,000 acres is our sweet spot to do basically really sort of bespoke campus-style, highly buffered data center complexes really drawing from the lessons learned from Northern Virginia, where you often will see these onesie, twosie data centers, sometimes, snugged up next to residential uses, schools, golf courses, and things. And so in addition to the GIS layers of land and power and fiber, I think that fourth GIS layer that I've been focused on is really community political viability. Put simply, we want to go where we're wanted because we know that we can arrive at mutually advantageous arrangements between both the hyperscalers, ourselves, and the communities where we go. But we want to go where we're wanted, and properly sited, these can be very, very beneficial for the communities that they're located in.
All right, from my perspective, I'll go a little bit deeper and just talk about water. But if the site already has water, that's a big benefit. Looking at the localities, treatment capacity, supply capacity, those types of issues that they would need to be considered. Not only that, but also the conveyance and being able to get enough water to the site to provide adequate water, especially if it's a water-cooled facility, is important. Also, from their perspective, just kind of understanding what the water use needs are, not just now, but into the future. Because if we're upsizing facilities for the data center, we have to be mindful of what that does to our water residence time in the water system and water quality issues. So if we have a projection that the data center is going to be utilizing 3 million gallons per day and they only use 500,000 gallons per day, then we may have a water quality issue within that system, so that we want to be aware of what the needs are now and how they're going to ramp up over the future.
I would say from the perspective of a utility-based economic developer, particularly electric utility-based economic developer, sites that are scalable, I think, are very important. It's not only what infrastructure is present today to help accommodate the initial construction and initial demand power requirements of a customer, but what infrastructure needs to be either extended or upgraded if there is an opportunity for future growth. It's not cheap for these solutions for the customer. And I think for the customer's perspective, if there's a pathway to support future growth opportunities, that's something that's going to help push a site with a greater competitive advantage.
Yeah, that's a great point, because once they build a data center, the risks go down for each successive data center. So if you have a site where you can accommodate maybe 4 48 megawatt facilities, that's just very attractive to them, because after the first one's done, they keep going. For me, as Schneider Electric, we want to make sure that the power is ready for us. When we show up on site, we're ready to turn things on. We want to make sure that we are not delayed, because what happens for the construction teams is everything gets squished because that turnover date doesn't change. Because as everyone said, the velocity requirements for these investments is astronomical. So what we need is to have room to be able to accomplish it, accomplish the work safely. So for me personally, that would be the biggest one, and then a good place to eat lunch. Honestly.
I'll ask one more question that's going down the line, and then I'm going to have individual questions after that. And that question is, what would you think, again, from your perspective, is the biggest myth regarding data centers that you would like to pop the bubble of today? And then what's the myth that's out there that does have a ring of truth about it that we as leaders need to think about how to address it? Jason, we'll start with you.
I would say noise. I just finished a facility that at the property line, it was 50 decibels.
And tell us what 50 decibels is equivalent to.
Maybe a quiet conversation. A lot of the new air-cooled chillers, especially when we put them on the roof with good stealthing and sound absorption, I mean, the loudest thing that ever happens on that campus is when the generator turns on. But those have so much sound baffling in them now. I mean, you don't want to be anywhere near it when it turns on if you're inside or anything, but outside, you don't really hear them. So I'd say that's probably the biggest myth. And then the biggest one that's a grain of truth is here's one that's a grain of truth, but also I'll show the opposite part of it. They don't produce a lot of jobs for people that work for that company in that building any given day. But we have to service these buildings. At any given day, there's 40 or 50 people there working on the systems from other companies or suppliers. So it's definitely a true myth. There's not a lot of guys that work inside of there that are working for that company.
The biggest myth I want to dispel is that there's a lot of, I think, misconceptions that if you do land an opportunity like this, you're out of the game from a power perspective. That is not true. What we do is we build to a solution to accommodate a customer's needs. And then if there are changes to a system, we only continue to re-engineer and improve that system. So it doesn't mean that if you win, that you put yourself out of the game. It just means that there may be a new timeline and a new solution to help accommodate future growth. It's the same from if you sell your industrial park land. It's the same principle. You build an industrial park, you are successful, you fill it up. What does your community do then? You look at how do you prepare for the future? It's the same principle that we look at from an electric utility perspective.
So I guess one of the things that I've come to realize just today is that not all data centers need a lot of water. And that's a big myth and a big issue that there's a data center going in close by here that there's a lot of questions about the water use and what that's going to do to the water utility and the water customers and the existing water system. So just knowing that, if there's not enough water supply available, then air cooling is a possibility if there's enough power supply. So just getting some clarity on that issue would be important.
I think they've hit on the big ones, but I will say that in some areas we hear concern, particularly in rural areas, about the potential for traffic impact, really even after the post-construction phase, which I think is very much sort of a overloaded concern. Most figures I've seen, it's about 0.5 car trips per megawatt. So for a project like we deliver, it's maybe like 100 people per day, which is really not significant impact anywhere. That's probably the one that I would speak to.
I've got a couple. I think the big ones have been touched on. So I don't know how widespread this is, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I have heard on multiple occasions that data centers don't pay taxes. I don't know how that myth has started. Chris touched on earlier, Loudoun County, over $900 million in revenue, 25% of their overall budget. There are programs, and in many instances, whether it be data centers or other economic development deals, that incentives are offered to help attract, and there might be a particular deal that has happened, but the upside to why we as economic developers do that is for the tax revenue in large part. So there is a program in Virginia, the Data Center Retail Sales and Use Tax Exemption, that provides an exemption on sales tax, but they still pay property tax. They still pay business B-poll tax.
And they pay sales tax on their building materials.
Exactly. So that is a huge myth it's mind-boggling how that has started. And then the other that I wanted to say is around the on the energy side. Yes, they do use a lot of power, but if we choose, we don't want to see rates go up in our region or in our community, so we're not gonna say yes to a data center here, but the next community may see a data center, or the next region. Again, rates are looked at from the state or within the utility provider. So the thought that just because we don't allow something to happen here doesn't mean there could be potential impacts to us because it's going to be next door doesn't hold a lot of water for me as well. So you would want to take advantage of having the the opportunity in your footprint to take direct advantage of those tax assets. So that's something that I wanted to throw out as well.
I would speak to one more, and although I'm not an economist, I would say I heard concern earlier about this potential for an AI bubble burst, and we could debate whether we're in a bubble or whether it's going to burst or not. But I can speak from our business model in particular, and we've raised a significant amount of money through private equity and other sources of capital, and our business model is really genuinely based just on base compute, right? So we work with the hyperscalers like Microsoft, the others that you can name. And so for the Microsoft architecture in particular, it requires really 3 nodes within 40 miles or a 50-minute drive each. And the growth that they're going to see, not for AI training models, which can exist sort of like on an island out by themselves, but for the tripartite architecture that the hyperscalers require, the base compute is only going to continue to rise as demand for cloud storage and uses continues to grow. So irrespective of AI or bubbles or whatnot, the need for data centers is going to continue to grow, and therefore we're trying to respond through our industry.
Great, thanks. So let's do a deep dive on a couple of issues. First, we'll start with water. So Tim and Jason, I'd like y'all's perspective on maybe best practices or what you're seeing either in your own operation or what you're seeing from your colleagues around the country. So Tim, we talked about air-cooled, but also tell us about reuse and how a utility, a public water utility deals with reuse issues and those things, what kind of investments you make, what conditions are important for you to understand with regards to the contract term and volumes that would make you want to embrace something like that. And then Jason, if you could talk about some technological solutions within the data center itself that reduce that water consumption.
Yeah, so reuse is an interesting topic. There's a lot of discussion going on now at the state level related to reuse, and the current Virginia reuse regulations, they're not extremely favorable for reuse in a number of areas. So there is an effort to try to revamp the Virginia regulations that would make reuse more palatable and more feasible. From our perspective, it's kind of an untapped resource that we have. We have a wastewater treatment plant that produces 13, 14 million gallons per day that just goes back to the river. So utilizing that instead of the potable water would certainly be a benefit, not only from the potable water standpoint to prevent or reduce the demand on it, but also it would be a financial benefit for the sewer utility to be able to utilize that as well. I think some of the challenges are getting the infrastructure in place for reuse because that infrastructure doesn't exist right now in a lot of localities. So the site would have to be in a location close enough to the wastewater plant to be able to tap into that resource. From a water perspective, there's also some questions in Virginia now about grandfathered withdrawals, for example. And so there's some uncertainty about how much water is available to some utilities that have grandfathered withdrawals. So as that process goes forward, some more clarity to the grandfathered withdrawal issue may be clarified through working with the state on that issue. So those are some of the factors that I would say.
Thank you, that's great. Jason, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean,
inside the shell.
Yeah, some things that we're doing inside the shell that's make the biggest difference is that we are going to obviously closed water loop systems. To give you an example of the difference that makes, a traditional cooling tower, evaporative cooling system would typically per 10 megawatts use somewhere between 10 and 15 million liters of water a year. We now, with a closed water system, we've got that down to maybe 150 to 300,000 liters per year. So about a 98% savings on water. Now, as was mentioned earlier, that requires more power. So what we've started to doing, a lot of systems, if it's not a liquid cooling to the chip, which that's the big talk right now for AI, not everybody can get those chips right now, right? Microsoft is stealing them all. So liquid cooling the chip is an easy system. What ends up happening is the building is allowed to breathe. We don't really spend a lot of time cooling air. We only cool the chip. What we are doing now is a lot of hybrid systems where it's an air-cooled, liquid-cooled system. So we have liquid cooling to the rack, which is cooling the racks. We leave the room at about 92 degrees. So what we've found is it's a lot cheaper to replace some chips every 3 years instead of every 4 years than it is to try and, provide cooling for. I guess when I started, we used to provide 48-degree air to a room. That's a lot harder than 92-degree air. So a lot of efficiencies. It's allowed for point density to go up, electrical density to go up, a lot more efficiency. Schneider Electric is obsessed with efficiency. So sustainability is our number one goal. And that's what we're trying to do. But I feel like everything we do, they just keep using the rest of it.
Jason, you told me a story earlier about something y'all had done out in Phoenix.
Yeah.
Do you mind relaying that story?
Yeah, it was a smaller facility in Phoenix. I can't name the client, obviously. If you go looking it up, you'll probably find them pretty quick. That had a system that was built in about 2008. That system was retrofitted in order to bring it to a closed-loop system with air-cooled chillers put on the roof. Massive amounts of savings for them, but it was more of a test bed for them for a liquid cooling system. What we are seeing is some of these older data centers are being phased out or turned into other things or turned into, like retrofitted systems. So I have to be careful what I say. I don't know if you guys saw what happened in the commodities market. We have to be really careful on what we say in the data center market. Copper, just on a typo from one article, a guy said data centers are going to need 500,000 tons of copper in the next year per gigawatt. And that made the copper industry explode in one day. It was supposed to be 500 tons, by the way. That's a 2,500%, change. And so we have to be careful on what we say up here. So just bear with us on some of the things.
All right, so that takes water. Let's turn to power then. So
Yay.
Yeah. So Whitney, what is, obviously there's always people are critical of how the lack of speed sometimes that deliver. Can you give us just some examples of some of the crazy kind of requests y'all get so everybody here has a perspective of what's coming at you and what the expectation is, and then what some realistic timelines are that y'all are putting into place to mitigate and to deal with that, because you need to have some sort of prioritization system?
Chris, I love this question because this feels kind of it's I think going to be enlightening to many of you all in the room. My first, when we're speaking to a prospective customer, whether it be the most experienced of end users all the way to the most green and entrepreneurial developers, the number one question that weeds out the readiness of an inquiry is, what is your available capacity? That is like asking us to, from our perspective, engineer to infinity. And because, as I mentioned earlier, we prepare solutions that are based on a customer's specific needs. We study it, we engineer it, we design it, we buy the equipment specific to it, and we construct to how we would accommodate that need, how we accommodate that need as day one, or what happens if we have an outage, for example, because we have to provide a safe and reliable operating system above all. So the number one kind of weeder question is what's your capacity, blanket statement, and then I need 100 megawatts in 6 weeks, or I need it in 3 months. That is a very unrealistic question because that requires an interconnection process and review to the overall transmission system. That takes time. That has to be studied appropriately, and it can take some time. That being said, we are working with our processes, Chris, to where we are meeting customers where they're at to the best we can. We're working with them through a multi-tiered study process that puts them on a track to, if they're ready to start committing to agreements, we can set that path while we're doing those additional studies. But the customers who are ready to go understand that process needs to occur. They're prepared for it, and that's how we're working with them through it. But for example, lead times are still impacting our industry. That's something everyone, it varies, sometimes day to day, week to week, and the type of equipment that you're looking at. There's a lot of factors, global, political, economic, social, you name it. How the product is actually manufactured can sometimes be a non-automated process. It may be a specialized build for the equipment itself that's needed. That can be either on the customer side of what they would be responsible for, say in the shell, for a lack of a better term, versus what would be responsible on the utility side.
Thank you. Matt, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say that that's a good point related to water as well. A lot of times when we get a question about how much capacity we have, and the answer is, well, it depends. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, and as you said, we can design and build to what the demands are going to be, but we need to know what that is, and trying to identify how much water is available at any given time is challenging.
Thank you.
To your earlier point, I mentioned earlier that we're working in about 15 states from Arizona to Virginia. We see a broad diversity of practice, but more and more frequently, we're seeing utilities really try to separate the wheat from the chaff. Whereas there was a time when two cowboys with a truck would call themselves a data center developer. It still happens.
Still
yes.
happens.
But now increasingly sophisticated jurisdictions, and I'll just speak to Virginia. We have a large project in Hanover County, which is a Dominion service territory. Dominion has a very sophisticated process by which you pay up front, not just for the power studies, to be slotted and batched for future delivery, but also paying upfront cost for grid hardening and other improvements, including the full freight cost of substations. So we're seeing increasingly in more sophisticated jurisdictions like AEP territory, like Dominion, where they're separating the wheat from the chaff.
Thanks. I'm sorry, Whitney, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we still do try to make our process customer friendly, though. We do have some processes and protocols, but that is something I just want to echo, is that we we're still seeing the emergence of this coming forward. And, from our perspective, the customer interface aspect is still very important through that process.
Matt, this question's for you. Without giving away anything proprietary, you've talked about several times your business model. Help us understand your business model and how that business model shapes how you evaluate sites that you're going to look at to potentially purchase.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And then what the back end of it is with regards to finding the user.
Right. Thanks for the opportunity. So I mentioned earlier I work for Tract Capital Management. This is the third iteration of a business that was founded by really sophisticated guys and gals beginning in the 1990s, including companies like Level 3 Technologies, Level 3 Communications, and Cologix, the former of which laid much of the long-haul fiber across the United States. But our founder decided that really looking at the long term over the next 10, 20, potentially 30 years, the hyperscalers are tremendously good at what they do, but maybe not quite as good in terms of being able to plan in advance. They know they need powered sites as soon as 26 and 27, but we want to be there when they need sites in 31, 33, 35, and 2040. So toward that end, we look for sites that have really that mix that we talked about earlier, assemblages really between the 350 to 1,500 acre site, where we can go in with the appropriate amount of water, power, and then that community political viability I spoke to, and essentially do all of the horizontal development to prepare it for hyperscaler build. And so we, on our capital, we're essentially, to use a Virginia term, we're creating mega sites that are ready for hyperscalers on our own dime, using completely unleveraged capital without any help or tax benefit or support from the state or a locality. And so that's our first business, Tract. Our second company, Fleet, actually will come and build the data centers themselves and manage them long term should a hyperscaler not choose to take that site.
Thank you. Vince, you've got, in this new role, you've got a very interesting perspective of seeing what Virginia does well and what we could do better, because you get exposed to a lot of best practices from other states. What would you say Virginia's done right to prepare ourselves for this industry, and what are some lessons learned either from your own experience here in Virginia or what have you heard from other states that you're like, that's actually a really good idea, we should be thinking about that?
Yeah, great Great question. So we talked a little bit earlier about May East and May West and what got Virginia into the data center to be a leader in the data center space. What we didn't really touch on as part of that conversation is our leaders back then had the foresight to recognize what the digital economy could do. So Virginia, in and of itself, was one of the early adapters of a tailored incentive program, and I've mentioned it a couple of times. You'll hear us say SUT, or the Data Center Retail Sales and Use Tax. So one of the things that we have done well is we provided a competitive advantage to doing that business in Virginia at a time in which most other states didn't have it. So that got us in the game with all the infrastructure that was there that really helped us snowball and become who we are today. That program is currently will sunset in 2035. Unless it has changed. There will likely be bills this session that will address a path beyond 2035, 2050, maybe beyond, maybe not. There will likely also be legislation that would be proposed that might do away with it or make significant changes to it. The reason I bring that up as an example of doing something right, we were early, we got out ahead of the game. Today, the numbers change on a daily basis. Chris mentioned Arizona's bill. There's roughly 40 states that have similar programs now. The last count, I believe, was 38. And then 4 other states that actually don't charge SUT. So the competition is real. When you overlay our power delivery, Dominion being 2032 or whatever those numbers may be, getting close to 2035, and you're asking a data center operator to make a commitment, a long-term commitment to Virginia, where as of today, our one tailored incentive program sunsets in 2035. They may not get power until roughly that time. They have to look at their capital outlays compared to Virginia versus some of our competitors and make a decision, and Virginia wouldn't be in a very competitive position in that. So that is both a positive that we have done, and currently, unfortunately, a concern from my perspective. The JLARC study, we did mention we were going to say JLARC quite a few times. Megan probably got that from me. They account for it's roughly 90% of the data centers would not have happened if it were not for this tool that we have to our use. So that's critically important, and that's right at the top of the list. But other things, there's been communities. We've got more experience energizing data centers in Virginia than anywhere else, so that works to our advantage. So whether it's the utility or some of the localities that understand permitting needs and the ability to get things done and deliver on their commitments is a huge upside. However, at the same time, as we've seen this large growth, there's been some communities that are considering ordinances that are pretty restrictive, that could limit or hurt the ability to do larger scale campuses. So at the local level, making sure Virginia has been historically incredibly good at providing the environment to be successful. That is a little less so today. And others, our competitors have come online to really help expedite that. I will say, Whitney, you do a great job of being humble up here. The APCO and Dominion both, again, with their experience, they are great partners, and it's about power right now. So making the commitment to we can get you this power by this date, that gives us so much assurances. And then there's the bridging technologies and all the other things that can help condense some of those timelines. But our utility partners are a huge advantage for Virginia. And then ultimately, our economic development partners that are helping to ensure that sites are ready, and the community engagement side and everything that we've talked about to date. So I think that are the keys to our success.
Great. Thanks, Matt. You had a comment?
I would just offer that, for us, it is an absolute gating question, almost binary. Does a state have in place the incentive? Because we know that the hyperscalers will not locate without that incentive in place. And so we very much look to that and hope that Virginia will do everything it can to retain and extend this coming session.
Great. Thanks. We've got a couple of minutes for questions, if there are any. Happy to open it up. Please.
It's a great point to bring up, and that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Couple of things to note. Data centers don't come in one shape, size, or form. We've talked a lot about, though, that their needs are getting bigger. Therefore, the likelihood that there may be some kind of infrastructure upgrade or improvement to support a large user could come into the scope of work that would be needed to serve them. When that happens, there's a lot of things that can happen, particularly like we'll use large load as an example just in general, because one thing we haven't touched on as much today is that, yes, this is a data center discussion. We're focused heavily on that. But data centers are not the only variables that are driving the tremendous growth that's facing the electric utility industry today. The needs of our manufacturing industry are changing. They're requiring more power. And people are just using a lot more power. I used the example of my kitchen counter the other day, thinking about it. 24 months ago, I didn't have an air fryer. My fridge didn't tell me that I was eating a bunch of junk and telling me that I need to go to the grocery store because we're about out of milk. Those are the type of things that, are happening in everyone's daily lives these days. And that comes into play. You hook those appliances into the outlet. So whether it's not going to a data center, you're still using power. So in the process of working through supporting the needs of the data center industry, we're building for the future. We're looking at making our systems more resilient. We're making them hardened, and we're planned to support the future growth. So from a data center perspective, we'll use this as an example. You put a large load into a geographic area. It's going to do things to your transmission system from a thermal perspective and a voltage perspective. From a generation perspective, too, there's right now we do have some headroom, but as we continue to grow, there's going to be needs to look at generation. We are working in ways to put those opportunities to the customers if they are choosing to take those large loads, but as we're working to their customer specific solution, there will inherently be benefits that will strengthen the overall sub-networks within communities, and that does go back into the distribution system in a lot of instances.
I'm going to have one closing question, but I've got time for one more. Go ahead.
I think there's a lot of case-by-case differences that can occur. Some common pieces that would influence that question, Paul, are, is the entity, actually buying power from us or from the market or from a competitor? And then are they utilizing the transmission system to deliver that power to their customers as well? There's a whole federal, national, and grid kind of consideration that gets into interstate kind of power agreements and how that all works. But I wish I could give you a more detailed answer, but it can vary significantly based on the arrangement.
And I would add to this that it's also worth noting that our clients in the data center space are pretty sophisticated on the energy side as well. So most of the co-ops, there have been projects that would double the size of a co-op's current footprint, and from a resource perspective, and just really from a feasibility to meet the timelines, that's asking a lot to double what you currently serve in a short amount of time. Most of the folks are buying their transmission. They're providing the distribution, buying transmission from an APCO or for a Dominion. So the partnership is close in most instances. But our clients are sophisticated enough to know where there are some of those challenges, and they come with creative solutions as well.
All right, I'll close this down with one question. I'd give everybody less than 30 seconds to answer that, and that is, if you had the focus of this session was on concerns and challenges. If you had a magic wand, we'll start with Vince working down the line. If you had a magic wand and there was one thing you would change, what would it be?
That is going to be. I'm going to have to. It's one in power, quickness. These are large, capital-intensive supply chain issues. It's all about power, so that has to be at the top of the list. But these folks are professionals and know how to handle that. So I'm not going to use that as my one. I would want to make sure that the information about data centers in the world, in the community, are better understood. I would like to wave the wand and take the misconceptions about this industry and have it fact-based. That would be my desire.
Yeah, actually, to echo off of Vince, really to reframe the conversation away from just data centers toward critical infrastructure, because that's really what we're delivering here. I mean, if we care about national competitiveness, global competitiveness, the future of research and other industries, data centers are going to be required for those, and it's a part of our national progress and a part of our national security. And so we need to reframe the conversation back to critical infrastructure.
And from speaking of critical infrastructure, a lot of water utilities are in need of water system upgrades as well. So if the water supply is available, then the more users we have, the more revenue we generate to be able to address other infrastructure needs as well. So I think that critical infrastructure, not only power but water, needs to be part of the conversation as well.
Supply chain for critical equipment, both transmission and generation equipment. There's going to be a lot of demand for that, and I do think there's a lot of manufacturing growth opportunities that could come through supporting the development of the infrastructure that's needed on all fronts to support the continued growth. So not only the data center drivers for that growth, but folks like the water and electric utilities.
Mine's easy because it affects me directly. I would go to every high school, at junior college, and college in this area and tell them how amazing it is to work in this industry, and how much of a pleasure and difference it made for my family financially to be able to do this job.
That's great. I think y'all have heard from a really good group of people. Let's give them a round of applause. And I think we've